Well, hi, welcome back to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Raven. Our guest today is Elaine Hart. She is the Chief Banana Officer at Power Fitness Events. She's a resilient fitness enthusiast, former luxury event manager at Rolls-Royce Motor Cars, and overcoming challenges, including anorexia. Elaine discovered strength in fitness and community. She transitioned her career to empower others through spin classes and founding Power Fitness. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she further adapted her business to offer virtual classes, and she has a mantra. It fits with the pedaling or the spinning theme of keep pedaling. Her story inspires physical and mental strength, shared passionately with others. So I'm really happy that you could be here today. As I stumble through an introduction, I'm going to be resilient, I think. Elaine, thank you for being here.
Yeah, not at all. Thank you for having me, Mark.
So I want to ask, and Elaine is joining us from England. I'm not making a mistake there. England versus UK, more broadly, England. Yes.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm sure we've been called worse, but yeah, either. South coast of England is where I'm at.
That's right, the south coast of England. As Ted Lasso, the character, famously asked, "How many countries are in this country anyway?"
Absolutely, yeah.
So many mistakes made along those lines, but so I've got to ask, and before we jump into the favorite mistake question, as I'm saying it in my American English, Chief Banana Officer, I'm feeling self-conscious about that. Why are you the Chief Banana Officer?
It's a great question, and that is exactly the point. It's a talking point, and for me, bananas are play, and the reason for the banana was, the business is rooted, power is rooted in connection. And, in every movement experience, there will be a banana. And that includes, if we were to connect virtually, I introduced the lesser known BYOB, so bring your own banana. I don't know if that's a little bit like corkage as you might have in the States, So, but people would throw their bananas at the screen and it has a word on it, and it's a word that inspires you, a word about how you feel, this type of thing. And it just gave the people opportunity to talk and share and say connect. And, that was the real thing for it, but it's playful. And, and in my backstory there, as you mentioned, most sport and luxury brands, there was a bunch of validation and a bunch of big job titles. And for me, I didn't want to be a coach. I didn't want to be a fitness instructor. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to have any of those labels. I am Chief Banana Officer. So that's it.
Okay. And so it is. So, and that doesn't seem like a mistake at all. You're quite, that's great. It's a great title.
Yeah, absolutely intentional.
So that's not the mistake, Elaine. So we will get to the question we usually start off with here, with the different things you've done in your career. What's your favorite mistake?
My favorite mistake was actually quitting the career, building Power during the winter of 2019, about to launch it in the spring of 2020, and then we all know what a crazy year 2020 was. And I thought it was a great year. It's the 2020 vision. It was, it was my opportunity to peel Power off the vision board, and I'd had that vision. I started the spark came in 2012 in Sydney. So it was a long time coming, and it took me a while to make the transition from everything I knew in most sport and luxury brands into Power. And then I bought a bunch of spinning bikes, because that was where I started. I believe I was born to ride my bike. And I had all the kit. I had the formula. In the early days, it was spinning bikes, headphones, and bananas. And that was my formula for creating brave, empowering spaces that shift, and that sort of mental, physical, emotional shift. And I had nowhere to go, because I never wanted a premises. I wanted to get out and about, wild and free, delivering this immersive movement experience in workplaces, community spaces, festivals, anywhere and everywhere, out in nature primarily. And I couldn't. And so I had all these bikes in storage, and I thought, what am I going to do? And so there was a lot of businesses that came from lockdown, and I don't believe even that launching as lockdown hit is entirely unique. But actually, for me, it created a really unique pivot. And actually, that was kind of why it turned out to be my favorite mistake, because I've made quite a few over the years, but that would be my favorite.
Yeah, and gosh, I mean, a mistake can be a bad outcome, or it can lead to a bad outcome. Nobody could fault you for planning, or anyone else who planned to start a business in 2020. You were making the best decision you could based on an assumption that 2020 would be a normal year.
A great year to launch a
That's not
business.
your fault, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I also, I truly believe that we look back and we don't see how stuck we felt. All we see is magic. And for me, that's exactly how it is now. And everything is unfolding as it should. We can control what we can control, but sometimes the letting go and the surrendering to that circumstance, you're not your circumstances, you are your decisions. And it was the decision I made at that time that led it to be one of the best outcomes for me.
So tell us more about that pivot in approach, and even it seems like a little bit around payment and business model. Where did tell us about how that evolved?
Yeah. So that's it. So I was due to launch, I couldn't launch, and for me, I thought my business power is rooted in connection. That's what it is, because I believe the fundamental, the approach I have, that the approach I'm pioneering is a bananas approach to mental health, and that comes through from the connection. And connection for me, is a great quote that humans need a tribe as much as bees need a hive, and it's that kind of thing. So I thought, how am I going to connect people without introducing people one by one in person and creating these spaces where people interact? How am I going to do that? But I thought the only way I can do that is through a screen, and we actually need that connection more than ever. So I thought, well, not everyone has a spinning bike at home, and so what can I do? And I thought, well, I never wanted to be spinning. I just wanted people to move in a way that they want to move, that honors their mind and their body on the day. So I said, well, why don't I ride my spinning bike in my garage at home, and I'll connect through Zoom, but I'll invite people all across the world to move in the way they want to move. So if they want to walk their dog, great, they can walk their dog. If they want to ski, they can do that. They can paddleboard, they can run, they can walk, they can ride a bike, but they don't have to. And I didn't have a community at the time. I didn't have a database, so I threw it out there on the basis that anyone and everyone could join. Because again, a lot of people were being made redundant at the time. There's a lot of change going on, and we really needed this community. We really needed this family and this bunch of people. And so I didn't want financial means to be a barrier for people.
Yeah.
So I ran it on a pay what you can basis, donations. And I did that for two years. And I had over 3,000 faces join me online. I had up to 100 people on a screen at any one time. There were people from all over the world, and when we couldn't travel as well, when we had people rocking up, in Milan, running with all that architecture on the slopes in Sweden with all the snow, and on the beaches in Australia. And there was us in, the south coast of England, doing whatever we want to do. Yeah. And then they were all, throwing their bananas at the screen, like, Mark, I see you a banana, and you're out, you're on the East Coast, and, show us your word. And then I would talk about your word. And then, somebody else, and they'd say, I really want to show you my view of Milan, so they'd be on mute, but their camera would come on and we'd see their view. And, it was wild. It was so wild. But it created an incredible family. And, the pre-ride and the post-ride was as long as the ride itself, because people would just hang out and chat, and some really beautiful expressions of vulnerability during that time, and courage, and everything that power is. And I thought, this is it. This is what I wanted to create, is this community. And then when I came out of lockdown, people would approach me and say, I hear you're now offering cycling sessions. And I'd say, yeah, I've got a whole bunch of bikes just that have been in storage, for 2 years. And, so it was just, I didn't become known as spinning, which I never wanted to be, because for me, spinning is brilliant. I love it. That's why I chose to buy a bunch of spinning bikes, but it has such a fierce stigma. I don't do that. I don't shout at people.
I'm sorry to, you cut out for about 5 minutes. So I'm going to have to figure out how to do an edit. You said, maybe if you can go back to try to have you get you're in a good train of thought there. I don't think this is exactly where it cut out, but you said something like, I never wanted it to be about spinning, but I had all the spinning bikes.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yep. Uh, so yeah, so I never wanted to be spinning because for me, I love riding a spinning bike, but it's got a real stigma around the way in which a spinning class is kind of constructed and delivered. It's really intense, and there's a lot of I will never shout at anyone to stand up, sit down, go fast, to do any of that sort of the metrics behind it all, and I never wanted it to be that environment. And so for me, it actually gave people the opportunity to move in the way that they want to move. Because, for example, if I said to you, Mark, the way you're going to achieve your goals is by riding a bike, and you say, well, I don't like riding a bike. I like walking, I like running. And I'd say, okay, great, you move in that way, And so that really became the foundation of it. And I didn't become then known as a spinning business. I became known as the bananas business that I always wanted to be. And it just came back to that. It just came back to bananas. And people would be walking around with their phone and a banana in their hand, and people would know exactly what they were doing. And so it was a brand thing for me. So it became then it wasn't a gimmick. It was something really meaningful. People were capturing memories, and people were writing things that were really profound on their bananas, and they were sharing that.
No, that was a delayed launch. Do you think in a way the launch was better because of the publicity, I don't know, the awareness that people had of you and the banana thing, for the brand?
Yeah, I think it was probably one of the best things that could have happened to the business, because I think if I'd set up what I'd planned to set up, I would have been constantly overcoming oh no, I don't like spinning, or I can do spinning down the gym. I've already got my membership to do that. It's nothing unique. And I think I would have been trying to convert people from that place. And I didn't have to, because people were welcome. Anyone and everyone was welcome. And they were able to be part of it because they could donate whatever they wanted to be part of it. And it became playful and fun. And suddenly they were achieving fitness goals as almost a side order to what they came for. And what they came for was that community, and that, so they had the accountability, which is so important when you are moving towards health and well-being goals. But it came from a place of nourishment,
Yeah.
and joy and play. And we don't play enough as adults,
Yeah.
And bananas are just playful, and they're great. They're refueling as well. When you mentioned my backstory of anorexia, it kind of came full circle with that.
Yeah.
So it's bananas.
But it's bananas. The decision to leave your career and to start a business, in what ways would it have been a mistake to stay with the career as you look back at it, even if the timing for launching the new business wasn't ideal? And I'm glad it worked out the way it did. I'm just curious, to make a big decision like that, what was driving you, inspiring you to do that?
It was moving towards the truest version of me. And I think that's what's made the business so successful in its unfolding, is that I've always come back to me and my vision and my why for setting this up. And it's given me the space to be unashamedly me. People meet me and they say, oh, you're exactly like you are on social media. And I think, great.
Yeah.
I can't, and it hasn't always been that way. And in an environment where I was as well, there was certain expectations, and well, that's what we're surrounded by. And actually, the best thing that we can do is do that thing that is at the core of who you are. Without the mask, and without that, holding back, really, and without having the opportunity to create and express as we were uniquely intended to do, and that's the wonderful thing.
Yeah, it is. For those who are listening to the audio won't realize, Elaine is holding a banana, and it says on the banana self-care, and it looks like maybe you'll want to eat that banana you're going to eat that at some point. But before you do, why did
it around, it gets a little bit more bruised, but that's great for imperfect and ready for a smoothie or a banana loaf or something like that.
Yeah, but tell us why, and especially this week when we're recording, why it says self-care on the banana.
Yeah, so it is self-care week, and I've just recorded a little video actually that I'll post on LinkedIn, just something very short that I looked at the Self-Care Week campaign and it aligned really brilliantly. Something just caught my attention. It aligned really brilliantly with what we were talking about in terms of metrics. And one of the biggest shifts I had in self-care was actually removing my sports watch. And when I looked at the campaign, one of the recommended tips for Self-Care Week was count your steps. And for me, I thought, oh, okay. For some people, that may be great for accountability. But is that self-care, or is simply moving self-care? And I would argue that simply moving is self-care. And actually, so that since I removed my sports watch, I've moved from that place of self-harm to self-care, and from punishment to nourishment. My watch became, for me, and a helpful voice in my head. It was either telling me I was doing too much, or it was telling me I wasn't doing enough. And so actually, when I took my sports watch off, and I never looked back, and actually it's partly because I've got a tattoo there which is Sanskrit for air, so I look at where my watch used to be, and I think breathe. So often the wearable tech is telling us to breathe, and actually we I don't need to tell somebody to tell me to do that, and you take your power back, and I think that's really interesting. So I realized that I bought all these spinning bikes, stripped off the computers and replaced them with bananas, because I didn't want it to be metrics driven. And by removing my watch, I suddenly had done what I've done for everyone who partakes in a power experience, for myself.
Yeah.
And always we're putting ourselves at the back of the queue, but suddenly, I'm not focused on that, and so counting your steps, for a lot of people, that can be really helpful. And so, if people wearing tech is helpful for them, then I would absolutely encourage it. But for me, it wasn't a helpful piece of kit. Yeah. And so actually for me, that was my biggest shift in self-care. So I was just sort of sharing it as the idea of, is it helpful or is it not? And to actually just take that moment to make a choice.
Yeah. It's good that you could recognize that of what was working or what was not working for you, and then try something different. It seems like part of the mistake is to think one size fits all when it comes to advice around fitness or self-care, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a charity over here in the UK called Young Minds, and I do a lot of work with kids at risk of exclusion. And they had a great campaign that was self-care is not one thing, self-care is your thing. And I think that really nailed it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, well, that's great. So I wanted to ask you, Elaine, kind of more broadly about dealing with challenges, being resilient. One thing you say I think is interesting is making the stumble part of the dance. I stumbled a bit during my introduction of you. I'm going to leave that in there. That was part of the introduction dance, if you will. But why do you say that? That we should maybe embrace the stumble?
Yeah, absolutely. That is what I would call banana chat. So when that word comes up, so if you put mistake on your banana, I'd say absolutely, Mark, make the stumble part of the dance. And the whole point of dancing is the dance. And the whole point of living is to feel alive. And those are that's the mental strength and the affirmations, the mantras that I sort of speak over the top of the playlist as we go along. So making the stumble part of the dance is absolutely that. I also, around mistakes, it's creating the gap between you and the mistake, and recognizing that you are not the mistake. Mistakes and failures at the success, that's the opportunity to learn. Right. But when we sort of, all consumed by the mistake, we're not creating that gap to be able to learn from it. Same for me, with the mistakes that I've made along the way, it's standing back from it and observing it, and then, making a choice of how you move on. But I'm all for the dance, and I'm all for living. And I think living is taking risks and making mistakes, I think there's a lot of shame that also attached to mistakes,
Right.
A lot of shame.
I mean, I think that happens far too often, excuse me. And I think, in this podcast, we try to remind people and people like you who share your stories remind the listener we're all human. We all make mistakes. That is part of the human experience. And I think trying to figure out how to bounce back or how to learn is key. And it seems like you've thought about that quite a bit, right? Of just trying to figure out how do we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say that my anorexia was a mistake. You know, a lot of people would say it was a coping strategy. You know, and how when we're talking about sort of shame that's wrapped around mistakes, you know, I had a lot of shame wrapped around my anorexia. And actually, the biggest thing for me was not necessarily recovering from anorexia. You know, I don't remember that recovery all that well, although, you know, my recovery really has inspired why I do what I do, because I sit, you know, on my bike or in a space where people are moving. And now, you know, they're able to move on the bike, off the bike, in person as well, in live settings, both, you know, corporately, privately, community spaces, all of that kind of stuff. But, you know, I share my story in that environment, you know, very subtly by, you know, sharing the mechanisms and the mantras and everything that's kind of, you know, got me to the place where I am today. But the biggest shift was not only recovering, but it was 20 years later, I actually named the condition, named the disease, a dreadful disease that is anorexia. It took me 20 years to name it. And I remember naming it, and it was just so incredibly freeing. And I thought, wow, you know, that shame, and it cannot, I believe, and I think I might be a Brené Brown quote, but shame cannot survive being spoken. I mean, she's the queen of shame, right? In all the ways. But, you know, and I do believe that shame cannot survive being spoken. And so actually, when I said the word anorexia and I named it, you know, naming that whole thing was just such a big shift for me. And I thought, wow, you know, if I can give that gift to somebody else, if I can show them that if I can do it, so can you, that is what I bring to that space that is power. And so again, you know, with making mistakes, we all make mistakes, but if we're wrapped up in a whole lot of shame about it, how is that beneficial to the world, you know?
Yeah. And when help me, Elaine, when you say it took you 20 years to name it, was that a matter of denial of that condition, or just not being comfortable saying that was part of your past?
It was the word. I talk about when I was unwell, when I, you know, but I just I couldn't name it. And I mean, there was no doubt of what the disease was at the time, but I couldn't name it.
And disease is, I mean, it's interesting. You were at least pondering, was that a mistake? But it seems unfair as an outside observer who hasn't dealt with this firsthand to refer to a disease as a mistake, and maybe not asking for help is a mistake, but it's all very complicated.
I mean, it's not a small topic. I don't think we have enough time, Mark, but it's, you know, it's a really valid point. I think the mistake is you know, also connects with choice as well. And you might, you know, argue at the time there was, you know, I didn't have a choice, you know. At some point there was a decision that was made, I guess. And then, you know, I mean, it's such a complex disease, and, you know, a dreadful disease. And I think, you know, so many people that don't recover from it. And I still have a lot of people now asking me about it, and I'm able to talk about it very freely and very openly. And it's a privilege to be asked in what way I can help, you know. And because of the mechanisms, you know, one of the biggest things for me at the time, I didn't have access to, you know, the mental health support that I needed, because ultimately that's what it was, which is why I'm on this mission to create accessible mental health support and a mindset shift, you know, because one of the greatest mantras at the time was, you know, the idea that it's a voice in your head, and you have that little voice, and if you choose to starve the voice or feed the voice, you're starving the anorexia, or you're feeding the anorexia, or you're starving your life, or you're feeding your life. And for me, I'm very visual, and that was something that really helped me. And so everything we're provided with is information, and then we make a choice, and everything starts with a decision and we take it from there. And so I think it's probably unfair of me to put that on me in terms of it being a mistake. But at some point there would have been a choice, I guess, you know?
Yeah.
It's a complex one, you know, it's a big topic.
And yeah, I think, I mean, one other question that comes to mind, I know you're trying to encourage self-care. You're wanting to help other people by sharing your story in different ways, in different places. That I think it's always this question of like, what do we do if we think someone else is unwell? Like I talked to a friend, she's actually in England as well, who took a course in, I'd never heard this phrase before, mental health first aid.
Yeah, I'm a mental health first aider as well. Yeah, I've also had the. Yeah, I mean it's becoming much more prevalent over here for sure. I mean, I'm not it's really important to, if I ever have a situation where somebody comes to me with something that I'm just not qualified to deal with, all I'm doing is sharing my experience. So I will absolutely not make any sort of professional comment in that respect. Yes, I've gone through the mental health first aid training, that type of thing, but there are so many people who are in much more professional space to advise, which is not me. But I always flag that to the relevant people. All I do is share my experience, share what helped me, so I think that's all I can do, and I think that there's a lot of benefit to that. And arguably there will be some people who say that that shared experience is quite often more valuable than that sort of really purely professional input. But I would argue that you absolutely need both. Absolutely need both. And so I would never be in a position to say choose one over the other. And I'm not in that qualified position to say that. But I do provide a space that is very nurturing. And a space that is a beautiful opportunity to express and be vulnerable and recognize that other people struggle, and we all struggle. And times in our lives, we all have challenges. And, if we can benefit from that shared experience, that's an opportunity to do that, which again is why I never wanted to be a coach. I never wanted to be all of these kind of things. I never wanted to specialize in any particular area. I just wanted to create a space that is, all those things that I've described really,
Right. And I'm partway into an online course on mental health first aid. And, I think it's fascinating. I think clearly need more of that here in the US. I'm happy to hear that seems to be spreading more in the UK. And the parallel, I mean, I'd never heard the phrase. I'd never thought of a parallel. If someone is injured or bleeding, or, there are things you can do from a physical first aid standpoint. That doesn't make you a doctor, right? And part of first aid is getting help and medical professionals involved. But I think this opportunity to try to at least identify maybe a situation where somebody could use, maybe needs some help. And I can see where this is far less obvious than someone is bleeding because they've cut their leg. But this idea of asking or trying to prompt, and clearly I'm not through the training yet. I don't know how to speak to this, but the one question I have for you though, for what you do is, if you see a customer, come in for your class and it seems like, maybe they're exercising too much, they may be anorexic. Are there ways to try to bring that up in a way that's most helpful? Because I can see people being defensive about
that. I mean, the recovery from anorexia and so many conditions and diseases, this type of thing, always has to come from within, and I think that's one of the most heartbreaking things, is that you see people, or you see families that are struggling, or friends that are struggling with their friend who is in a situation, and it's a very sensitive, very individual situation. And I think one of the things that I feel very proud of is that, Mental Health First Aid England actually recommend power as an additional support. That's something that they recommend is, these additional supports, exactly as I was saying. There's so much professional help out there, but it's these additional supports, these additional spaces. And I don't know what it's like in the States. And I mean, obviously you have a very different setup in terms of insurance and this type of thing. But, over here in the UK, the list, the waiting lists now for support are even, I mean, it's almost impossible to access. And, something I experienced in relatively recent years, I went to ask for help. And actually I was told I'm too well to receive help. And I think, gosh, wow. I think if you were somebody who was told that, who perhaps didn't have the resources, wasn't quite there, what on earth would their situation be? So I think to be aware of spaces where, and you're saying, somebody comes in and they're I just hope that, they would see an alternative, which is all that happened to me. Again, a choice, a decision, I had, it's all information, and it's just what we do, what we choose to do with that. Anorexia is never something that will go away entirely. I would be wrong and naive to say that it was, and dishonest to say that it's something that disappears entirely. It's so entrenched, it's such a vicious thing that, coping strategy, that's all it is, really. And it's there, but it's very different now in terms of the volume, in terms of the noise that's there. The noise will always be that noise, is is how I describe it, but it's what you choose to do with that. So you turn down the volume on that, and for me over the years, again, it's a practice. Self-care is a practice, self-love is a practice, and it's practicing those alternative behaviors. And there's hope, there's absolutely hope with anybody who would come into any space with a condition that's, as you say, so many mental health conditions aren't visible, but being in an environment that supports and nourishes them, there's hope, in that practice of returning to that space that is nourishing, noticing your surroundings, noticing what you're reading, noticing what you're watching, noticing what you're consuming in every sense.
Yeah.
And then your choice of if that's serving you. My watch wasn't serving me.
Yeah.
That's just one thing. And that's in recent years. Every moment of every day, we have a choice whether we watch the news or we don't watch the news. It's, there's micro choices that are actually huge. They contribute massively as to whether or not, we make a choice that serves us or it doesn't.
Well, that's very well said. Again, we've been joined today here by Elaine Hart, the Chief Banana Officer at Power Fitness Events. We talk about, some really serious subjects here, but maybe to end, not that we have to, but we'll choose to end on a lighter note and talking again about playfulness, the importance of being playful. I'd like to hear more from you, but one thing that comes to mind is, even in the corporate world, I've had mentors and people I've worked with who were formerly of Toyota in the United States. And they would talk about how, the corporate culture that they were working in, at least, was at the same time both serious and playful. And that the sense of playfulness leads to more creativity and better problem solving and better performance. And I think a lot of organizations stifle playfulness. I don't know if I hope you didn't experience that, but tell us more about, kind of how and where you learned about the importance of being playful, or was it just innate and you had to create an environment to be that way?
I think it's absolutely about your environment and who you surround yourself with and energy, because it's interesting. People say to me, who's your ideal client for power? And I'll say, in the early days, I'd say everyone can be part of power, because especially now I've introduced a different energy space to power. So there's the high energy power that I do, but I've also have somebody working within the business that does a calm and peaceful, intentionally calm and peaceful power. So it's more adapted Tai Chi, guided meditation. And that is even more inclusive and even more accessible. So people in wheelchairs are able to take part, people with neurological conditions, recovering from stroke, rehab, this type of thing. Because it's still immersive. They've still got their headphones. They're still scribbling on bananas. But the intentional energy is very different. So you could say anyone can be part of power. They can be running, they could be walking, they could be doing adapted Tai Chi, they could be in a wheelchair, they could be not in a wheelchair. It's all mixed in together. It's an inclusive environment. But then actually, what it comes down to is people who are curious about the idea of playfulness. You know, if somebody came to me and said, I refuse to look at that banana, to write on that banana, I'm not even going to ask you about the banana, you know, or they put their banana on the floor. I mean, I've had that happen. I thought, wow, you know, so actually it's not everyone. It's people who are open to play, you know, and I'm not sure at what point it gets stuffed down so much. You know, I mean, I'm British, you know, I mean, you're talking to the right, you know, demographic in terms of, you know, nationality. But, you know, when did we lose that childlike wonder of a brand new day, of that childlike wonder of a rainbow? You know, when, you know, there's really simple things that nature offers us and beautiful reminders of that. And you think, you know, when did that happen? And you know, there's a lot around, certainly over here in the UK now, I'm seeing more and more sort of inner child work, you know, and so reconnecting with that childlike version of you and, you know, what happened there, you know? And I think it does, you know, that writing on a banana and, you know, I experience sort of, you know, the most alpha males within our society will arrive and they'll be, you know, and they'll be, well, you know, you want to tell, you know, what you need to tell us what to do, and you need to change the gear and tell us what we need to do and shout at us and stuff. And I said, no, we don't do any of that here. And where's my computer? You know, and all of this kind of thing, you know. And I think, okay. And then they'll say at the end, you know, there's a whole lot of love in your chat. You know, that chat that you bring in over the top of that playlist. And there's something about when people are moving and you're pouring in some really good stuff. You know, really good mental strength stuff, really good mindfulness stuff that really gets people present in that moment. And I know that I've got them when I sort of see them reach for the pen and they're writing on their banana. And I think, yeah. And then if they actually shed a tear, I think, yes. Yeah. Because they're in touch with their emotions. And there's just something that, you know, it's about making people feel seen, I think is a big thing. And if you're feeling seen, supported, safe, loved, chosen, you're more likely to play. And when you're playing, you get creative and then you're alive. You know, it's such an elevation, you know, but it's coming from a place of empowerment. You know, it's about gifting that opportunity and it's whether or not you take it.
Yeah.
Again, it's a choice. We all have a choice.
And there's a choice, or I guess the only choice is not the stiff upper lip approach to facing challenges.
You can say that now. I've said it, can't you, Mark? It's okay. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, let yourself off the hook a little bit, you know? I mean, I think one of the things I'm proudest of is with power is that I'll never be tripped up with it. You know, I'm so locked into the why of it. I'm so locked into the now of it. You know, I think if I'd had a business plan from the start, if it didn't just come from the heart, you know, ultimately, I mean, it was kind of a back of a banana skin business plan is how I describe it. Because it has just unfolded in a beautifully organic way, but the way in which I want to scale it, because ultimately I want to create that shift with mental health, you know, so much and to the world, because you know, I can scale this formula now, you know, and there are bananas available in every part of the world, you know, and I want to, you know, I've run, you know, advanced leadership program experiences, you know, through power and, you know, with corporates in the States and, you know, but there's every opportunity that I can actually just rock up with my headphones and buy some bananas. I'm sure you've got some out there and then, you know, some pens and we can do it out there because you know, that is what I can bring and I can deliver out in the world. But also from that, I want to replicate it. I want other people, you know, I want this to be delivered in different languages. I want it to be delivered, you know, even more multi-sensory than it is, you know. So whilst we're out in nature, we can bring in all of those cues of nature, but there's also scent and there's touch and there's all of these things that make an experience even richer and make play even bigger. You know, you can't play too big. You know, and it's energy. It's all energy, you know, and we have, again, an opportunity to show up in the world and contribute. And why wouldn't you want to do that? you
Yeah.
know,
That's
in whatever way you can, and even on your trickiest days, you know, everyone has an opportunity to contribute, and that is simply by maybe smiling, by saying hello. You know, you never know what that could bring to somebody's day,
Mhm.
and that's your power,
Yeah.
and that's amazing, you know.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing all of that to the podcast here today. You know, it's great conversation with you. Thank you for sharing, you know, your story and some of the things that you've learned along the way. So again, our guest today, Elaine Hart, Chief Banana Officer at Power Fitness Events. We'll put links in the show notes where you can learn more about Elaine and her work. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks again, Mark.